Okay, and we're recording. All right, so today I have Ryky Tran. This is the Linsider Podcast, episode 5. 5. And really happy to have Ryky. I guess let's get started. Ryky, thanks for taking the time and making the time. You, I would say, are one of the guests that, first of all, I have this interview prep sheet that I give to all my guests just to kind of set the stage. Some people have given me like responses like, oh, it's so like, it's like so thought out and all this kind of stuff, but never does anyone actually take the time to write a thoughtful response. So you're the first person that like wrote me back like thoughtful bullets.
Oh,
because like the idea of the and so thank you for doing that. But also I would say like it's there, but I want to have more of like a casual conversation with you. So if we go off and go into tangents, that's totally fine. If you want to talk about something that's not on there, that's totally fine. If you want to have more of a discussion about something, that's totally fine. But I also want to say that your responses are like gold. Like that's why I told you as we were heading towards this yesterday, I was like, I'm so excited to be chatting with you because these are things that aren't talked about enough. And that is really one of my goals of doing this, is to have conversations with my friends and to cover topics in the realm of entertainment, very broadly defined, cross-cultural, very broadly defined, right? And interdisciplinary. So thanks for making the time. So to get started, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I was raised in Boston. I was born in Vietnam and came over to Boston with my parents at the age of about 1. And so I was I guess some people will call me, I'm a refugee kid. I mean, that's essentially what I am. And parents came to Boston. So grew up in Boston, spent the first 18 years of my life in Boston. And then during the senior year of my high school career, I decided to drop out, move to LA. I thought I wanted to become an actor, and life has really taken off in really interesting ways. So came to LA, managed to get a few good years of working in Hollywood. Then pursued my passion of speed skating. That led me to a whole different tangent of life, and did that for 4 or 5 years or so competitively. Then retired from that. We'll get into details of kind of how that happened, but yeah, I got into a car accident towards leading up to the 2006 Olympics, and then that derailed that career path. And then since then I've had what I would call normal jobs, a normal life, working, doing things that what normal people do. And so moved around a whole lot, moved throughout California, lived in Canada for a while, and then went back to California to go back to school, got my high school diploma, eventually got into UCLA and finished UCLA, and then started worked in the corporate world for a few years with automotive industries like Audi, Volkswagen, Subaru. So then after that, got married, I guess settled down a little bit, got married, had some kids, and launched a YouTube channel, and that's what I've been doing since. So yeah, very simple life.
I love the way you say that. We have to normalize this stuff. And okay, just mention, since you mentioned the YouTube channel, we're going to get into it like further, but mention the name of your YouTube channel and what it is.
Yeah, so I run a YouTube channel called Burrfection, and it's a knife-centric channel. It really just comes down to me learning about knives, teaching myself, improving my sharpening technique, and learning about things like knives, how knives behave on different whetstones. It's really just an exploration channel about kitchen knives.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And we'll get to that. But I think I want to take it back so we go kind of chronologically a little bit. So I know one of the things as I read your bio that I thought was worthy to discuss and spend some time on is, you mentioned, of course, born in Vietnam and you moved over to Boston and refugees at the age of 1. And then I found fascinating this way that you got into Hollywood, because you said you dropped out of high school and then you moved here with basically nothing. So, but then you said 6 months after moving to California, you were homeless and living out of a car. Yeah. And then somehow another 6 months later, you got a break working on a Jet Li movie.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so leading up to, getting into high school for me was a really bizarre kind of thinking back now, it was kind of something that that's my German Shepherd never does this. For some reason she's doing
it's
that.
The power of the podcast. The
Coco,
dog senses.
No.
Yeah. No worries, we can edit that out.
Going into high school, it was thinking back now, I don't know how I managed to do what I did or did what I did. My parents were divorced when my father left the home when I was, 11 or 12 years old. And very soon after that, I started working. I started working at a really early age, doing internships, working at local community centers in Chinatown, getting to know the community. And then I eventually got hired working at basically a community center in Chinatown that oversees a lot of the development efforts, kind of bringing the Asian culture into Boston, being responsible for really gathering the Asian community into a really tight-knit circle so that they can support one another. And so I kind of got plugged in that way. And so I started working at a really early age. And around my senior year of high school, this was a really pivotal moment in my life, because at that time, a lot of people in my life were, I started seeing a lot of friends get hurt, get killed. A lot of friends were getting into drugs. And so, heading into my senior year, it was kind of like a do or die. And, I felt like if I stayed in Boston any longer, my life wasn't gonna last very long. If you asked me when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, if you asked me what would I do in 10 years, I would have told you that I don't see myself living past the age of 18. There's just, I remember really vividly, there was one night it was a Friday night. There's a party that my friends and I would show up to every once a year. It's called the I don't even know what it's called, but it was held at the Knights of Columbus in Boston. It's just a big hall. And one night, so in high school, I would normally go to this party, my freshman, sophomore, junior year. And then on my senior year, I didn't go to this party. And that night, there was a shootout, and a bunch of my friends got shot. And so, I thought, so I go to school the next day, and, everyone's passing these newspapers around, and, multiple shots. And I thought, man, that should have been me, So that was kind of the wake up call for me to leave Boston. I had to say, you know what, I can't stick around. There's no path. There's no path here. There's nothing for me in Boston. And so I started to looking at ways of how I can leave. And then I heard an ad on the radio for looking for actors at this, the studio. And so I showed up one day, cold called audition. I auditioned. It was really just an acting school. That's essentially what it was. But, going there, talking to, my acting coach and meeting a couple of actors that have worked a little bit in Boston, I felt like, you know what, this might be like a ticket out of Boston. Mm-hmm. And so I I said, what do I do from here? And so they said there's a competition called the IMTA, which is kind of a big convention for actors and models that happens once or twice a year. And so it happened in LA I think that January in 2000. So I signed up for that. I paid for that. And I actually couldn't raise enough money to go. I think the cost was like, I don't know, $2,000 or maybe like $5,000 to go. I only raised I had enough for like $1,000. So I told my acting coach I couldn't make it. So they actually, they funded my trip.
Wow.
And so they said, I think you might be onto something. We want to help support you in this. So they gave me a job at the office at the acting school to kind of help fund this. But for the rest of the ticket, they paid for it.
Wow.
And so January 1st, we hopped on a plane. Me and a dozen aspiring actors and models hopped on a plane to LA. Spent a week long in this competition, and I had, I don't know, a dozen and a half agents say, hey, if you want to move to LA, we'll represent you. So I said, cool. I think that's great. So I came back to Boston. I packed my bags. I literally told my teachers, hey, I'm going to move to LA. I'm going to drop out of high school. My principal was shocked. He was like, don't do it. Like, this is the dumbest mistake you'll ever make, And so that a month later, I'd say all my goodbyes to all my friends, and my mom hopped on a plane to LA, 2 suitcases and, $300 in the pocket, and got out here, found a job. And so that's kind of how I ended up in LA. And I had an uncle living in Orange County, so I slept on the floor of his home, and slept on the floor for a couple of weeks. And one of my coworkers, I found a job. He said, "Hey, man, come live with me in Canoga Park area." And so I was in Canoga Park for about a month and a half, and then his landlord said, "Hey, because he was renting a room from a buddy, and his landlord said, "Hey, I'm selling the house. You guys got to go." So then I literally, at that time, I had no friends in LA. Like, I didn't know anybody now. Like, my uncle was an hour south. I didn't want to go back to Orange County. I wanted to stay in LA. So the only option I had was to sleep in my car. So I slept in my car, and that's what I did for the entire that whole summer. It was about 3 months or so.
Okay.
And
what year was this? Like around
2000, exactly.
Wow.
In 2000. This all happened in 2000.
Okay.
And so now I'm living out of my car. I'm like, what do I do? Like, so I had a job at the management company that was, that represented me. So every morning at 6:30 a.m. I got into the office, helped do breakdowns, breakdown services, basically working the mailroom essentially. And I got into the building extra early, go brush my teeth, took a shower at the sink, like in the sink.
Yeah.
And then I'd be there. They're like, "Man, how are you always here so early?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm always here. I'm on time." And so I'd be there in the mailroom, and then by 9 o'clock, if I'm submitted for an audition, I would go to the audition, and after my audition was done, then I'm free. Like, that was my day. And so between 12 o'clock and the next day, I had to find things to do, keep me busy and stay motivated. That's kind of hard when you're living out of your car, But so I met some friends. I ended up going to a church called Mosaic, and a couple of guys heard about my situation. They said, "Hey, come stay on our couch." And so I was so grateful for that. So I moved into this home, and onto a couch. And within a week of me moving into that home, a week or two of me moving there, my car gets repoed because now I've had no bills. I couldn't afford the bills. Now I've got no car. Living in LA, no car. like no money in the bank. I'm like
this is before
2,000.
Uber, so you really
Yeah.
are out of luck.
Yeah, and I remember, I mean, the number is so vivid. I was like $2,000 negative on my bank account, right? Because all the negative withdrawals and fees. It was just kind of a really messy situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how I made it over the next 6 months. I booked a couple acting gigs here and there. I booked some. The most notable one was a Discover card commercial. I landed a Discover card commercial during that time. That carried me for a few months, and then I was submitted for a number of auditions. I was submitted to what led to the big break was I was submitted for Rush Hour 2. And so Rush Hour 2, they were casting. I didn't get it. I mean, Zhang Ziyi got that role, right? So she landed that role. It wasn't me, but the casting agent, kept my photo. And when they were casting, they weren't even casting for this role on The One. They were looking for a hair model for Jet. Literally, they were looking for a hair model, and they didn't play it that way. When they called me, they said, "Hey, we're casting for a film with Jet Li. You want to come?" No, they didn't say Jet Li. They said we're casting for a film with a very famous Asian actor. We need you to show up. And so I'm like, oh man, this is another casting call. Like, I didn't want to show up. Like, I was just like, at that time, I was ready to just book my ticket to Boston and go home. Like, I was at that verge, but I had no money. I couldn't even book a ticket to go back to Boston. So I said, fine, I'll show up and let's see what happens. And I borrowed my roommate's car and met Wesley. His name, I to this day, he's in, like, if it wasn't for that car, my life would not look the same today. Like it was we were living in Alhambra, and the casting call was right by LMU. Revolution Studios used to own that stage. I don't know who owns it now, but it's right by LMU. So this stage is over there. So it was it's a good hour, 45, 50-minute drive without traffic. I get there at 7, 8 in the morning, get into a room with, like, I don't know, a dozen and a half, two dozen other Asian actors, and we're all sitting there. We're kind of packed like sardines. Like, there were only enough chairs for like 10 of us or a dozen of us, so half of us were standing, and we're sitting there for like an hour, 2 hours, just like waiting. We're just like, what is going on? No one knows what's going on. And half of us are talking to one another. The other half are like real silent. It's kind of awkward. And so finally, somebody walks in, and I don't even know who it was. Somebody walks in and says, you go home. Like, he sent everyone home except 3 people. And so it was me and 2 other guys. And then he goes, you 3 into the trailer. We're going to cut your hair. We're gonna pay you $100 for a haircut. I said, okay, fine, $100, great. And so sit down, they give me a haircut, and then they send us back into our room. And so we're kind of like, what is going on? And then 10 minutes later or so, they call us back, and across, like, out comes, like, they call us out of we're in the trailer in the mobile unit, and then across me walks Jet Li, right? I'm like, is this really Jet Li walking across me, right? I'm like, this is not real. Like, so I was stunned. And so after the haircut, he says, you can go home. So and then I was left. So he goes, take a seat. And so I'm like, okay, I'll sit down. And the next thing you know, Jet sits right next to me. And he gets the same haircut as I did. So the hairdresser says, Jet, how do you like the haircut? And Jet goes, it's okay. And Beaver was right next to him. So this is like the first time I met Beaver and Jet. And so literally I'm sitting there for an hour, and they're cutting Jet's hair. And it was the strangest experience, because I'm like, I want to talk to him. I wasn't even sure he spoke English, because I had just watched Lethal Weapon 4, and I watched some interviews with him, and so I knew he spoke English. I just wasn't sure if I can speak to him. and I didn't like, are you allowed to speak to Jet? Because this is like Jet Li, right? So I just sat there, and his assistant Beaver came over. He goes, "Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Beaver," and so So I thought I was done. And so they went inside, and I was back in my trailer just by myself. And the AD, the assistant director came over. He says, "Hey, are you available to work on a movie?" I said, "Yeah, I think I can." He goes, "Come inside. Let's do some screen testing with you." So we go into the studio. They had a stage set up, and then like I walk in, and there's Mark Dacascos. Like Mark Dacascos is right there, and Kelly Hu was right there too. I'm like, no way. This is like, how is this really happening, right? And they don't, it's not that they're rude, but they don't acknowledge me. I'm just in the corner.
Right.
I just see them like 30 feet away.
They don't know what's going on either.
Yeah. So I come in, and then they stand me in the light, and I'm standing there for like a half an hour, just really bright lights. I'm like, this is the first time actually I've worked on a set. I've never been on a film set before, so like I didn't know how intense these lights were, right? I got a tan that day from all the lights. Yeah. But they stand me there, and then they stand Jet right next to me, and we're literally looking at each other. He goes, turn, face each other, turn around. We're kind of we're just doing our thing, right? I'm like, I am like arm's length from Jet. And then like there was just one moment where we both face each other, and he like pushes me, like just kind of a light, like punch. I'm like, oh, he's playful, like he's cool. And he kind of grabs me and just does like he was just really cool. And I was like, man, this is like awesome. So so then the all that that took about 3 hours or so, 3-4 hours of light testing, and at the end the AD came up and he says, hey, we're going to shoot in January through like June. If you're free, we'd love to have you on set. You're booked. You're going to be Jet's stand-in. I said, oh, okay. So that's what happened, from moving to LA. And so that film we shot for like 5.5, 6 months. It was a long shoot. And I made a ton of money because relative to what I had no money. Yeah. And so I was fed every day. I was given a hotel for 6 months. Man, it was the only way I can put it was like that was the big break. Like that literally was that showing up to that audition or that phone call, like that changed the entire course of my life.
Yep. I mean, listening to that story, some of the takeaways I get from that is like, there's like this sliding door moment, like at so many moments of that story, right? From whether it's that acting coach in Boston, or it's this management company you were at, and then it's like, the situation with the cars, and then finally getting to that audition, and then like luck has it, like you kind of get into that role. My question to you, I guess, after listening to that is, what was your kind of biggest takeaway from that? And what would you say to kind of people that might be like you, now, back then, like the 18-year-old, now who may be listening to this, or, what's something that you can share?
I mean, in my mind, there's so many things I want to say to that, but I think if I had to like sum it all into like one sentence, it's like to show up, right? If you don't show up, you're guaranteed to miss that role. If you don't show up, you're going to miss the plane. If you don't take that shot, you're going to miss, right? I mean,
and then how did you do that? Because you mentioned like, even in your story, like that audition that got you this break, you didn't want to go. So what was it that, everyone has those days, right? Yeah. How did you make yourself show up when you didn't want to?
Well, there was only two choices at that time, like between showing up or going or crawling home. Like at that point, I would have to hitchhike back to Boston. I was literally at the end of the line. It was, I'm living off of like, a couple of packs of ramen a day. I'm living on the couch, and it's like I either show up or like, I think at that time, I was the motivation for me was like, okay, I've been to a bunch of auditions. I've gone through the process, and I know that I have booked roles before, but at the same time, I was just really tired, right? I was really tired living out of a suitcase on a couch, and so that was essentially my, like, when I said during that time, I was actually ready to go home, like, in a sense, like, this was going to be like my last audition. I'm like, I'm going to show up, because I've never missed an audition before. And so I was like, and in talking to people, I've had a chance, I've worked as a background on a bunch of different commercials and TV shows leading up to that time. And there's one thing that everyone always says, like, every successful person that I either heard from or said something to me was like, show up. That's like the thing that you can do. If you can do one thing, is to show up, and show up dressed for the role. I think it's like being prepared and being eager, being willing to do the work. I think that's going to get you so much further than dreaming about something, or like just playing the scenario over and over in your head, what you could have done differently. If you only just show up, I think that at least in that case for me, that changed my life.
Yeah, or another way to say it, instead of romanticizing this industry and what it is, I had someone say to me once, when I asked them about what their secret to success in the industry was just, be persistent, because the example they gave was that so many people in this industry, they come in bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and then, very quickly they drop off. And the thing is, the people that succeed in the industry are the ones that keep grinding at it day after day after day, because it's not overnight or it's not instantaneous, right? And you have ups and downs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You ever hear the story about Danny DeVito?
No, what did he say? What's his story?
What he said. I think he was turned down over 500 times.
Yeah, right.
It's some insane number. Like, when I heard that,
because when you look at what he probably had to overcome, because he's not.
Yeah. And at the time when I heard that number, he was already in Twins with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right.
He was Danny DeVito. Like, everyone knew who he was, right?
Right.
So it's hard to envision like him as someone in my position.
Right.
It's like, but he kept grinding away, right?
Yep.
I mean, but.
And another thing I want to touch upon is you haven't mentioned it yet, but as you were telling your story, and I asked you like the year 2000, what were some of those big challenges? I mean, you talked about the personal challenges, but I guess what I'm interested in hearing a little bit is about, this is 2000s. This is at the time when Jet Li and Jackie Chan kind of were making their waves stateside, maybe along with Chow Yun-fat, Michelle Yeoh, Zhang Ziyi, like Crouching Tiger. As an actor from an Asian background, what were those challenges for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be really frank, and for me, it was whether it was my pride getting in the way, or it was or my unwillingness to act, or maybe I wasn't trained properly to act properly. But for me, it was at that time, every role that I auditioned for, I mean, almost without exception, I had to put on some sort of an accent. That, to me, like, and growing up, I didn't speak with I just spoke how I spoke, right? I never had to pretend. I never had to pretend to act. I never had to act, right? So for me, it was such a weird place to be, because growing up in Boston, even though Boston, you can say that Boston is very racist, and there's a lot of segregation between Asians, Blacks, and Hispanics. I grew up in the projects of Boston, so like for me, I didn't know any Asian people really until I didn't have any Asian friends until I was in high school. And so for me to have to essentially play a role that is completely outside of what I see as normal, it was really hard. And so, to me, so when I show up to these auditions, and I read the script, I've memorized it, I've kind of visualized what this actor is gonna say and just do, And then after I do within 2 or 3 lines, the director or the person doing the casting says, "Wait a minute, can you sound more Asian?" Like, and having never really been told that before, it completely just shuts you down, right? I wasn't trained, so I didn't know how to let that roll off my shoulders and say, "Hey, it's cool." Like he's, it's part of the acting role. But for me, it was more like it felt like it. People want to say like the script was written that way, and so you should act Asian. But to me, it felt like it was more of a personal attack against like Asian who doesn't sound Asian, right? It was more. To me, it just felt like they were just plugging all these people that look like me into a bowl, and we have to sound that way. I was told. I mean, I remember one time. It was actually my last audition ever. It was in Pasadena, and I remember going into this room, and and I'm not gonna bash on any Asian directors, but it was an Asian. There were 3 Asian directors, or 3. The producer, director, and the casting agents were all Asian. So,
for what was it? A film, TV, commercial? Film. Okay.
Yeah, and so I walked in, and I remember I did my lines, and then I'm pretty sure it was the director. She said to me, she says, can you sound more Asian? And I said to her, I'm like, no, I cannot sound more Asian. I'm like, what is the point? I'm like, why? What's wrong with the way I sound? Right? And she said to me.
And what was the story? Was it a contemporary story? Like it wasn't set in some like you were playing like an immigrant fresh off the boat?
Yeah, it wasn't a time period. It was just a regular film. I'm pretty sure it never got produced. But she said to me, "Can you sound more Asian?" And I said, "No, I can't." I said, "I'm sorry, I can't." I'm like, "How do you want me to sound?"
Yeah.
This is how I sound. And then she said right afterwards, without even like really like taking that in, she goes, "Do you like your hair?" I said, and I'm like, "Do you like your hair?" Right? And I'm like, "What is going on? Like, is she testing me? Like, is this for real? Like why am I here?" Like, and then she said to me, she goes, "If you can't sound more Asian, I've got a room of a dozen other actors that will." So I walked out, and at that point, I just said, "This is like it's bad enough that we get typecasted in Hollywood, not only typecasted, but Asian roles that were traditionally understood as Asian are given to non-Asians. That's one thing, right? But then like to be typecasted, that's another thing, right? That's another punch in the gut. But then having an Asian director or an Asian producer say to you, "You're not going to get this role because you don't sound Asian enough." It's like, I felt like it was such a, like the entire system has like contorted everyone's mind as to what Asians should look and sound like. That to me was like, that was, again, that could be my pride speaking. But I just, at that time, I had already worked on 2 films with Jet. I'd done a lot. I'd done like, a half a dozen national commercials at that point. I don't have to prove anything else anymore. I can stop what I'm doing now. I'll find my own way later on. I think I said something will come up later on where I can just completely write my own script, do my own thing. It might not be now, it might not be in 10 years, but I couldn't do what so many Asian actors were doing and still doing today. I can't do that.
Yeah, and there's so many things that are like fucked up with that scenario, and I 100% believe you. I actually think that if a lot of people heard your story who are not Asian, they probably would not believe you, but 100% believe that's true. And I also probably believe that it still happens to this day, right? 20 years later, I think it still happens to this day. And it's problematic, and that's, now thank goodness for like YouTube and other things like that, where, you can, start to find, kind of, your way without relying on these systems that are so kind of ingrained in a very problematic way, right? And I guess, before we get to the part about talking about, what you do now with Burrfection, I wanted to like shed some light on like kind of like those years after you kind of, I don't know if you call it left the industry, but, did less auditioning and focused on other things. So I see you like got your degree at UCLA. So that's amazing. And then you trained to be an Olympic athlete. I think that's amazing. I remember that version of you, but it was so long ago. I remember like you were talking about the speed skaters that you were training with. And that's like a total, like I want to hear you talk a little bit about that, because like, how did that even happen? Because like you, in the 30 minutes we've been talking, you haven't mentioned athletics. So, and speed skating sounds like a pretty, intense sport that you have to train for since you were like, a certain age. So how did you get into that and then get into it at such a high level?
Yeah, so I grew up skating, inlining and roller skating. Yeah.
Okay,
it was,
but that's like on the street, basically.
Yeah, on the street and in the rink, in the roller rinks. So
yeah,
I was during my I would say during my early high school years, and even late junior years, I would actually. I used to watch the Olympics as a kid, and so I remember seeing guys like Eric Heiden race. And so for me, there was the image of the speed skater was always in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so during the wintertime, I would actually come home from school, and I would walk. It's like a 20-minute, about a 20-minute walk from our home to an ice rink, a local ice rink. I walked there in the snow, in the ice. I was able to manage to raise like $40 to buy a pair of ice skates when I was like 13. And so I would walk to the ice rink after school and skate every day by myself. And so for me, skating it's always been there. It was kind of my escape from my home reality, mess up family life at home. So that was kind of my escape. And then when I moved to LA, and all that stopped because I just didn't have the time, didn't know where to skate, didn't have the finances, obviously. And so when I had finished my last audition, I said, what's next? Like, what's gonna keep driving me forward? And so I said, all right, well, let's just look at some skating rinks around here. The Olympics at that time, I've just finished, was the 2002 Olympics I just finished. And like Apollo Ono was a big name during that time. And so I'm like, all right, maybe I should become a skater. So I found a local a rink that's like a club that skated like maybe 3 or 4 days a week. That were like, it's like a half an hour drive away. So I showed up one night, never having to speed skate before, but I fell in love with the sport. That's I'm actually doing it now, not just watching it on the Olympics as a kid. So I said, all right, I'm going to become a speed skater. And so I showed up
just like that. Like one day you're like, I'm going to train for this.
Yeah, I showed up to practice 4 days a week. And and I met a guy. Well, there were like 2 or 3 coaches for the club. And there was one coach who's kind of retired. His name is Jerry, and he kind of just took me on. He goes, hey, I'll teach you everything you need to know. I'll help you with your gear, how to select your gear, how to set up your gear. And a year later, I qualified to train. So there's different levels of training for as a speed skater. There's Olympic level, there's club level, and to get into specific programs, you have to have minimum times. And so a year later, I skated well enough to train at the Olympic Oval either in Calgary, Alberta, or in Colorado Springs. So I decided I want to skate in in Calgary, because I just wanted to have an international experience. So in 2003, I packed my bags, moved to Calgary, Alberta. I lived there and skated there, and so it's a very intense time. You wake up at 4:30 in the morning. At least during my program, I woke up at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
An hour bike ride to the rink, skated for an hour and a half, an hour bike ride home, took a nap, then woke up around noon, an hour bike ride to the rink, workout, second workout of the day. And so that's what I did, and I got better, and the more I skated, the better I got. And a lot of people didn't believe that I just started skating in my 20s, my early 20s.
Yeah.
A lot of people were like, how long have you been skating? I'm like, oh, I've been skating for a year, and jaws would drop. And but you're right. It was definitely a sport that you have to train at a relatively young age. I started as an adult, at least in that discipline. So
yeah, because when you were a kid, you're saying that sounds like to me you were just having fun, like as kids do if they play like Little League or something like that. Like you weren't on some Olympic path back then.
No, I wasn't. And so, so I definitely it was definitely an uphill battle the entire way. I got good. I probably got as good as you can possibly get without having 10 years of prior experience.
Right.
I was pretty quick, and so in 2006, the path to the Olympics was a little bit different back then. So in 2006, 2002, there was actually a Mongolian skater who he literally showed up to the Olympic doors on registration day and says, I'm from Mongolia, I'm going to sign up for the Olympics. And the Olympic committee said, okay, fine. You're going to represent a country. Yeah. So he was the only I think he was the only winter athlete not winter athlete, but he represented Mongolia in speed skating. So for me, I definitely, I couldn't compete for the American team. I was nowhere near that good. I mean, I was good, but I was not that good. But I was actually going to show up to all the international races to get enough points to actually register as a Vietnamese skater because I was born there. And so the rules actually at that time, I actually could have done it. I could have done it that way. But I mean, that was kind of a long shot. Skill wise, I think today, I want to say confidently that I probably would have made it if it was based strictly on skill. But with Olympics, if you talk to any Olympian, there's a lot of skill and there's a ton of luck that has to happen your way.
Yeah. Especially you were doing, I remember, short track, right?
Yeah.
And short track, when you watch that stuff on TV, it feels like the Wild West of a sport.
Yeah, it's NASCAR. It's NASCAR at the Winter Olympics, and there's a lot of falls. You can be the slowest guy on the rink and win the gold medal because everyone in front of you, had a major crash, which is exactly what happened in 2002. There was an Australian skater, and Apollo Ono was involved in this crash where
I remember watching that.
He got silver, yeah. So he went down. The Korean took Apollo down. He managed to get his foot through the line because in speed skating, it's whichever skates past the line first without getting disqualified. The Australian was so far back that he avoided the entire crash that happened up front, and he got a gold medal. And so it's one of those sports where sport luck will definitely help you can help you get pretty far. But yeah, so that was kind of my path to the Olympics. That was my my dream at that time. That was my mission, was make the Olympic in 2006.
And that didn't happen. And you moved on from there. And then you started doing, like you mentioned, you worked in auto. And then I remember, I think when I reconnected with you, you were doing your jeans company. And then you started doing, you got married, you had a kid, and then you said you started your YouTube channel kind of just as a thing to do in between taking care of your kid. But I guess, through all of that, one of the things that strikes me is what you did and at the level of what you did, it shows kind of the power of your mind. Like, it strikes me that at some point you put your mind to these certain things, like whatever they were, like get into Hollywood, ice skating at an elite level, becoming and going into the auto industry, starting your own clothing company. Like, it's really a testament to like the power of the mind. And a lot of people, I think, maybe think that that's just sounds like nice or sounds good, but I think that is really true. Like do you have that kind of belief, or do you think it, happened, a different way?
So my current business Burrfection stemmed from my hobby, right? And I guess I should kind of backtrack. When I was speed skating, I started my very first company. So basically making gloves for speed skaters. If you watch short track, you know how they go around the corners and they have their hands slide in the ice.
Yeah.
And so on their fingertips, they typically will have these like carbon fiber tips or like epoxy tips that will help them glide on the ice. So I started instead of buying, there were a couple of skaters that were selling these gloves for like $60, $70 that had these tips pre-made. I'm like, I can do better than that. I'm making myself. I'm not going to pay for someone for it. So I bought some gloves, taught myself how to make these tips. And then other skaters were like, hey, who made those tips for you? I said, I did. They're like, oh, can I pay you for tips? I'm like, fine, give me $20 and a pair of gloves. So like I ended up doing like, I don't know. By the time I was done, I probably did 100 pairs of gloves for skaters in like every club and every place I skated at. I make tips for people. That was my business. It was it didn't pay my living, but it paid for my skates, right? So
right.
And so I learned, like, hey, you know what? There's always maybe something that you can do better. There might be a market there. So then, as a skater, we had to ride our bikes a lot, and so I rode my bike. I probably rode a bike 3 hours a day for 4 or 5 years, right? I mean, ton of mileage on my bike, and when you buy a bike, one of the most expensive things on a bike are the wheels. And so I needed new wheels one day. I said, man, like I don't want to pay $800 for a new set of wheels. Why don't I build a set of wheels? So I went out. I bought a book on how to build wheels. I went to buy like $1,000 worth of wheel building equipment, and I bought all the accessories I needed to build a wheel.
Okay.
And I built my first wheel, and after about a week, 2 weeks or so, I said, this is a good set of wheels. Why don't I start a business doing wheels? So then this is like right after I started, like, this is kind of as I'm transitioning out of skating. And I said, why don't I just build wheels? So I took my credit card, bought $30,000. Well, there was a wheel company that was actually going bankrupt. They filed bankruptcy. And they made these really beautiful carbon fiber rims, right? At the time, they were the lightest rims in the world. I said, I want to have all these rims. So I called the company up. I said, hey, can I buy? I know you guys are filing bankruptcy. Can I buy all of your rims? And so they're like, sure. So I bought $30,000 of these carbon rims, not knowing how to build wheels, And so, now I'm $30,000 in debt with like
rims. Sounds like a lot of money.
Yeah, that I've never like built a high-end rim before. Like so then over the next 6 months, I bought a bunch of cheaper rims as well to practice on. But basically, I had $30,000 that I had invested into this whole venture. And I was also selling cars at this time. So this is like I'm doing this at home. Like this is not like I'm doing this 8 hours a day to become a wheel builder. I'm just doing this on the side at home as a passion because I want a good set of wheels. And so I bought out equipment. Over the next 6 months, I just taught myself how to build. I perfected my wheel building technique, and then I started posting my wheels on eBay, on wheel building forums and like road biking forums, and then I started selling them. And then it's kind of hard to believe this, but like I started selling wheels to people who race in the Tour de France, who paid for $5,000 for these wheels. Like these wheels, I'm like, okay, well, let's see how much I can charge for these wheels. So I said, I'm going to sell these wheels for like $3,000 to $4,000 to $5,000. And I mean, at the end of the year, I had paid back the debt. I had a chunk of money in the bank. Had about $100,000 like left over from this business venture after the first year. So paid the debt off, had that money left over to do something different. I'm like, do I still want to build wheels though? I'm like, I love bikes, I love wheels, but I didn't want my time to be exchanged for money. It was a one-to-one exchange. I didn't want to build a wheel, sell a wheel, build a wheel, sell a wheel. Like it's you can earn a great living if you're, which I did. I earned a great living from it. Yep. But it was not in terms of time freedom and finance freedom for later in life. That was not, doing a one-to-one is not a good exchange.
It's a grind.
Yeah. So then that's when I went into the jeans business. So I had $100,000 that I dumped into the jeans business. That it didn't go so well financially for me. That was one of the businesses where I lost a lot of money in. But from that whole entire experience, it was like it was an awesome. A lot of good things have come from that. But yeah, I mean, I guess to answer your question, I don't know if it's necessarily the power of the mind for me. It's more about, can I do it better? And why would I pay for it if I could do it better? And, why would I pay someone else to do it if I can do it? Because in my mind, I guess in a sense, I believe that I can do many jobs extremely well. I believe that if you give me the time and adequate time to learn something, I can probably do it better than 99% of people who've been doing it for their entire life. Now, that's very arrogant. I understand that's a very arrogant statement to make, but that's how I operate. I truly believe that I can do a lot of jobs really, really well.
Where do you think that comes from? That belief in yourself?
If I had to narrow it down to like one, like, a reason, it would be because I didn't have anyone to depend on growing up. My parents were divorced when I was at a young age. I didn't have any male role models in my life. I didn't have any female role models in my life. And so for me, it was all about either get it done yourself or it doesn't get done. I had no one to rely on. My parents, they weren't bad parents, but they were working hard to provide for the family. They didn't speak English for the first 10, 15 years of living in America. So I literally had nobody to rely on but myself. And so I had to teach myself how to do things. I had to get everything that I've ever had up to that point by myself. So it was really out of necessity that I had to hustle, and I had to, I forced myself to learn things that I needed to learn. It was either that or pay for it. I didn't want to pay for it. So, so I had to teach myself how to do it.
No, I love that outlook. I love that outlook because I think that's so important to go in that direction, because like with so many challenges, you can think you're less than, right? Or that you're not able to do that, right? Because you have some disadvantage. But to have that mindset that you could do it better, or it's like a challenge to you, and you kind of step up to that opportunity or step up to that moment. I think that is quite amazing. I want to talk a little bit about, and then how did you get into, tell me the origin story then of like Burrfection.
Yeah, so it's another hobby that kind of went awry. It was, so I have an addiction, right? I mean, if you haven't gotten that from this conversation, it's like I've got this addiction of like business, like turning my hobbies into business. It's just like, and it's not always about money. It's not to become famous. I just, it's like there's a curiosity in me that says, can I do it better, right? And so.
I love that. Can I do it better?
Yeah, and so it stemmed from it has a kind of going has to appreciate Burrfection. So in 2016, 2015, I had my first daughter, right? So kids, they require a lot of time, but they also sleep, right? So when they're sleeping, you're sitting around the house, kind of trying to be quiet and not make a lot of noise, and trying to plan for their meal or whatever it is. So I had time on my hands because my wife was working. She wanted to keep on working as a teacher, and I said, all right, I'll stay home as a stay-at-home dad. I was perfectly happy being a stay-at-home dad. I loved it. I still love it. And so during that time, I would say, when she would take these and when they're young, they take like 2-3 hour naps. It's so I said, what do I do during this time? So I started I turned on I had a GoPro just because it was a little beater camera I had. I had a GoPro, and I started recording myself building wheels on YouTube. So I started a whole channel of me just building wheels and talking about bike equipment that I had, and talking about different, because I would go on YouTube, and there was no at that time there wasn't a single channel that really was fair about, or not necessarily fair, but really just describing the difference between this tire and that tire. It just didn't exist at the time. So I started my channel of just talking about different tools that I use for building wheels and different tires that I was using, different saddles on the bike, which one felt more comfortable in what position. It was just a really simple review channel of bike wheels and bike equipment. And then it grew to, like, I don't know, the first maybe 3 or 4 months of me doing it, it grew like 3,000 subscribers. I'm like, oh, cool, like someone's actually listening. And then I posted a couple of my videos on that channel, and they actually got a lot of views as well. And so in June of 2016, my wife and I took a 5-week trip across the world. We went and my daughter right now, she was just over a year old, right? So not even a year and a half. We took her to Australia, Fiji, and New Zealand for 5 weeks.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So we traveled the world with her, to those 3 countries. And then I didn't do anything on the channel. I didn't even check for comments. I just left the channel dead. I said, it's fun, but maybe it's not something that I can make money from. And so we came back after 5 weeks, and then I still didn't do anything to the channel. And then at the end of the year, I checked it, and the subscription grew to 5,000 or 6,000 subscribers, and with me not uploading a single video in like 6 months. So I said, maybe there's something here, right? I'm like, okay. So then I said, let's just narrow it down. If I had to talk about something every day, would it be knives or wheels or bikes? I said maybe knives, because for me at that time, knives were much more exciting, and I've always loved knives growing up. So I've had this infatuation with knives and swords my entire life as a kid. And so
I can certainly understand why. They look so cool.
Yeah. So I was on, and leading up to that point, I was actually on YouTube and different knife forums and looking, basically trying to find information on knives and whetstones, and nothing that I read was like objective. Everyone was from either like one syndicate or one other. Like there was like basically everything I was reading and the more you read, the more you understand that you're just reading people regurgitating something they've read or heard somewhere else.
Yeah.
I said, this is all a load of bull, right? So I went out there and bought about maybe 3 or 4 knives and about a half a dozen. Basically, I spent about a couple $1,000, $2,000 or $3,000 on stones and knives. And I just started sharpening them, using them. And I said, man, like nothing that I'm experiencing matches up to what I read on this other forum. So I said, all right, let's just post about it. So I posted a video, and I just started talking about it. And so this is the launch of Burrfection. And so basically in January, at the end of, January of, beginning of 2017, I took it seriously enough to where I'm like, let's just talk about the knives. And so that's when Burrfection happened. And, first year, I don't remember how many subscribers I got, but I don't know, like 20,000 subscribers or something. And then year 2 added like, yeah, it was pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
This is like organic. Did you pay for any ads or anything like that?
To this day, I haven't bought a single ad for Burrfection. I don't remember exactly. Was it 20,000 or 40,000 the first year? But it was one of those numbers. And then year 2 hit 100,000. Year 3, I don't know, 150, 200. So we're we're March, so year 5 now. So we're a little over. We're at like 250,000 somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So it's really been just a journey of exploration. It was never intended to be anything more than that. It was basically me learning about knives, and so the entire way was, along the way I learned more and more, and I was able to kind of took what I learned and explain it well enough in the video that people subscribe to it. But the reason why Burrfection started was because of my passion to learn, and my passion to not only learn, but can I do it better? Can I talk about knives better than any other person who's written about knives before? So that's kind of how Burrfection came about.
And I'm totally not in that world. What's the burr? Like, what does that mean?
When you're sharpening a knife, the way you know that you're sharpening the knife or that you're doing something is that you develop a burr. So if this was your knife, right, and you're sharpening the edge of it, this is your cutting edge. If you're sharpening one side of it, the opposite side would develop these little teeth like.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good thing.
Yeah. So it tells you you're doing something. It tells you that you're doing something on the opposite side.
Okay.
And so if you develop a burr, it means that you're taking away material. And so if you do it correctly and you develop a burr on both sides, you've taken off enough material on the cutting edge. And so then the trick is to make that burr, to reduce the burr so that it doesn't look like this or like that. It looks like perfectly aligned. So it's a perfect burr. So that's how Burrfection came about.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I have a knife sharpener and I definitely don't have a perfect burr.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about your interest in it. It feels so niche. So, I mean, I was aware of it because I know you, but it feels so niche yet. I have, for example, I think I told you, I have a friend who is a total chef, an amateur chef, not he doesn't own a restaurant or anything, amateur chef, but he's really good. And I was like, because he had all these knives, and I was like, oh my gosh, and I made some offhand kind of comment. I have a friend that does this. It's really weird. It's he was like, what's your friend's channel? He's like, I was like, Burrfection. And he was like, you know Burrfection? And I was like, apparently Ryky is a known quantity to people who are serious in this world.
Yeah. That's flattering. I've been stopped once or twice in public.
Oh, you have?
Yeah. Once I was actually at my local pool, my gym.
Okay.
And I was swimming with my kid. We're just playing, and then this very nice man. His name is Michael. He comes up to me. He goes, "Hey, listen, I know you're with your kid. I don't want to bother you, but I'm a huge fan of your channel." I'm like, whoa, that just happened. I'm like, no, totally, man. Let's sit down and talk. I'm new to the area. Tell me about yourself, your kid, your wife, and we, and then so now I see him at I'll see him randomly, and I'll say, "Hey, Michael, what's going on?" He's, I don't know. I guess he's shocked that I know his name, that I remember his name. And then it happened one time in Tokyo. I was actually in Tokyo.
In Tokyo, it happened.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. So I was. It's actually, the guy was from New York, and he was actually just in Japan. I don't know. I guess he's there for work. And I'm at a knife shop, and I'm walking around this knife shop. He goes, "Burrfection, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "It depends, Are you a fan?" He goes, "Yeah, man." So we took a picture together, and it's happened twice. but it's always flattering, it's flattering to hear that. I'd never thought of myself of anything more than just, I'm a stay-at-home dad, just a guy who sharpens knives.
Yeah.
I
love that attitude. So for my friend, I asked him before we recorded, like if he had any questions for you. And he was like, so the question that he did have is he wanted to know what your recommendation would be for a good, good value, all around starter knife. That's like a Japanese knife.
Oh man, there's so many.
Well, you're so into that world, right?
Yeah.
It's like I went to your website and I was like, I both loved it, and I was like, I don't know what to do here, because it's like I go to your website and you have all these tabs, and then within each tab you have you have to scroll down. There's you have you could tell the passion for the craft, because you've cataloged it in such an intense way, a library or a museum or something like that. There's this curation that's going on. And then when you click into each one of those tabs, there's this a lot of options for everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I mean, he sounds like he already has a bunch of knives, if you've been to his home. But there's so many good knives out there. There's different budgets. There's, the one knife that people always recommend is called the Tojiro DP. It's a $85 knife. It's a great knife. It's a knife that you can probably grow with for your entire career. With anything, there's only so much that you can improve with the equipment that you use. Expensive knives, just like having expensive cars, it's a luxury. It's nice. It won't make you a better cook. It certainly hasn't made me a better cook. It's if I was, if my cooking skills were anything close to how many knives I own, I'd be pretty famous, just for my cooking skills. But that's not the case.
That would be a different story.
Yeah. One day.
And so is that how you got into it? Because you were cooking a lot? Because it seemed like that's half the story, and then there's another side of it.
Yeah. So as a stay-at-home dad, my role was to take care of the home, right? I was a homemaker. My wife, as a teacher, teachers work hard. It's a hard job, they work long hours. It's emotionally draining.
Yep.
And so for me for my wife coming home, I didn't want her to cook. So I did as much cooking as I could. And so that was part of why I needed a good knife. I think most people don't even know where the knives come from. Most people, if you go to a friend's home and you say, "Hey, where'd you get this knife?" Most people I don't even know. Either it was a wedding gift or something I've had since high school. I moved out of my parents' home and I took a knife with me. That's kind of the story that a lot of people have. And so, so for me, at the time when I was a stay-at-home dad, we were living a comfortable life. My wife and I, we don't spend more than, we live way below our means, right? I mean, we live within our means. We don't spend more than we make. So we live a humble life. And so I just say, hey, I just want a good knife. And so during that research, I just couldn't find, anything that made sense to me. So that's how it happened. But cooking. I haven't talked about cooking because there's 1,000 cooking channels that will, that will put my channel to shame. It's not that I'll see them as competition. It's just I'm not an expert cook, but I'm able to explain knife usage much better than cooking terminology. So for me, talking about knives, it's something that apparently I'm really good at. So yeah, that's kind of why I stuck with knives and not try to do cooking. And I think it's something in life is you have to, I guess, to be quite honest, I love cooking. I love eating good food. I love eating out. But I would not say that I'm passionate about cooking. Right. So I can't fake passion. I can't fake me wanting to learn something that I may not have an interest in. And that's part of why I don't talk about cooking. Is because even though I love it, growing up, I watched my parents cook. It's just not something that I can say that I'm passionate about.
Yep. And then now, kind of 4 or 5 years in with this channel, and you've built an audience. How do you think about new videos to make? Like, what are the things that drive you to record a new video? What's your process there?
Yeah, so I still have a lot to learn when it comes to knives. I've kind of been reframing my thought about knives in general. Is, if you watch my videos, the first 2 years of my channel was really all about buying knives on Amazon, buying knives from different retailers, and just talking about it. Kind of, just a typical review channel. And then year number 3 and year number 4 was all about me meeting actual knife makers in Japan, using handmade knives from these makers in Japan. It was much more intimate. It was much more deep in terms of like talking about knives. It was no longer did I say things like, this knife is made of this steel, it weighs this much, is this tall. It was not that robotic anymore. It was like me actually talking to artisans, sitting down with them, having lunch with them, being able to pick their brain, being able to really share details about them that you would never read about or get anywhere else. It was much more of a personal experience for me. And then, so year 5, I'm continuing that with more knife makers. I'm expanding that to Western knife makers in the US, and the knife makers overseas. So I just right now, over the last 2-3 weeks, I just received a bunch of knives, or like 6 knives from knife makers from Austria, one locally that lives like an hour away, and then one in Australia. So like I'm really just broadening my horizon. But more importantly, and again, this is not about me not loving knives anymore, but I'm also considering what else can I do for the broader community at large, not just about knives anymore. So I'm really seriously looking at things like, starting a podcast that's not going to be about knives, but maybe about growing up in poverty. Maybe looking at me being an Asian American growing in America. What was my experience versus other Asian Americans. But I think there's so much. I think there's so much that needs to be said, and there's so many things that can be explored. Not necessarily about Asian people, but things like, I think when people look at Asian Americans, people like you and I, we look the same, but we sound American, but somehow we're different. They think we're different than them. Like, no, our parents go through divorce too. We have traumatic experiences growing up. We go through depression. We deal with drugs in our families. We deal with addiction. We deal with we deal with rape. We deal like all these things. I think it's like it's. I don't know if it's intentional. Yeah, I don't know I don't know if society does this intentionally, but it's buried, right? It's buried beneath the Asian success, the Asian role model.
Yeah, the model minority myth.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, it's like, can I create a platform knowing what I know now, and can I explore this? Like, is it possible? So I've been kind of exploring, really just planning in my head, is how do I just take this, not necessarily my knife platform, but just what I know, and really creating something that is not just relevant for knife people, but relevant for people who want to discuss these issues.
Yep. A couple of thoughts on that. One, first, to directly respond to that. I would encourage you, and if there's anything I can help you with on that, like, do the podcast. That's why I'm doing this. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I have been a fan of podcasts for a long time. And I've always known the power of storytelling in media, right? And for the longest time, like I've been doing this film and Hollywood thing, and that's really tough because you know this, like making a film is like a miracle every time it happens. But the beauty of YouTube, the beauty of podcast is like we can be like, hey, Ryky, like you have time, Wednesday at like 2 p.m. Cool, let's get on this and then do something. And then I just had this idea. So it's been percolating in my mind for like probably like a year now. I've been like, oh, I should do a podcast. I don't know what it is. And like, here's what it is. And I came up with the idea. And then like mid-February, I was like, find my first guest. And then I was like, figure it out. And then it was like, and then just launched it. And then I just launched it March 1st. I'm like 5 episodes in. I just released like the 3rd episode. But what's surprising is like, I look at the stats and I was like, I get like about 100 downloads are not people I know because they're non-US and they're places like Peru, Mexico, like South America, like all over Europe, India. And I was like, yeah, so I would just say to you, like figure out what that is and do it. And even with like, that's one thing I felt as I watched your videos. Like I have to admit, I haven't seen like a ton of them, but I selected a few to watch. And I think it's like this beautiful what you're doing now is like very beautiful culmination, at least to me it is, like of everything that we talked about through your life, right? Your background, personal background, your interest in acting, and being able to speak very authentically and reach an audience. And then you have like your entrepreneurial spirit in terms of like using content to then combine with your like business behind that. And then, just kind of like the persistence of like doing that and honing your craft. And then what you were saying is like, now you're like talking to these artisans and building that like personal touch. It's like really cool to see that. And yeah, like I would love to see, like, that's why I asked you the questions, like, where do you plan on taking it further? Because I think, yeah, it has a lot of legs and you can go in these many directions and you don't have to pick one. You could almost do, as many as you have time for. And also collaborate with people. Like, then to follow up with that, like one celebrity that I noticed that's super into knives is Jason Momoa. Have you seen that?
Oh, no, I didn't know he's into knives. I know he's into cameras. He's always talking about red cameras, but I didn't know he was into knives.
You should just Google that. Like he's so into knives. Like there's some knife makers like that. You reminded me of that because you said US, like you were looking for knife makers like here. And he, like on some of his social channels, he'll post because he gets someone to make something really cool. And then he posts about it when he goes and picks up that knife because it's like an art. It's like art to him, like a collection.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, do you find? I mean, are you? I mean, kind of shift the camera a little bit. Are you? What are you doing now? Are you still making films? Are you working with Alibaba? What's
so I left Alibaba about 1.5 years ago. Started my own company. And I am developing. So I'm really just one man right now. And, films take a long time. And so, but over the last year and a half, I've developed like a slate of like 8 to 10 projects that are pretty active that I'm trying to get going. But, most of that is outside of my control because even if I had raised money, like to get a film made, like the ones that I want to make, it's like at a minimum, if I'm looking at a low budget, like Sundance film, it's like 5 to 10 million. But if I'm looking at a more commercial mainstream type of film, it's like easily 30 million, 40 million, higher. And so that's going to take time, even with the TV series, right? A lot of things are out of my control. And so launching this podcast is like, what can I control? Especially like during last year, COVID and everything that we experienced through Black Lives Matter. And now through this ugly moment that we're going through with like the anti-Asian hate crimes. Like, it's like, what can I control? And my whole thing has always been about elevating Asian voices and storytelling. And like, when you mentioned like, doing something where you can talk more about like Asians that are like in poverty, right? That's why, like, for me, like, I want to have like a really cross-cultural discussion here with this podcast. It's like, though my first initial guests are Asian, like very soon, I am trying to get friends who are from all over, like different backgrounds, even if they're Asian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because Asian is like it's so diverse, but Hollywood's or the mainstream media sees it as like one monolith, but it's actually one of the most diverse in terms of everything, like countries, languages, like income level, like cultures, like everything is like, it's like super diverse. Even when you take a look at like China, people think it's like this. And China is actually like super diverse. It's more like the EU than people think about. And so my thing is like, I want to get a cross-cultural thing, like all types of Asians, but also just people, because I think that's the thing that like, I think mainstream media wants this like kind of bucket everything. And hey, there's this and there's that. And then what I'm trying to do or having conversations that I don't hear about. And I think like what you do and like kind of your story is like, I don't hear enough of these. Like, I hear about it sometimes when it's like a white person. Like I could say like a lot of your story remind me of like, maybe you're like Forrest Gump, or I hear it sometimes maybe with it's a black person, but I don't hear it about Asian Americans. And so I hope I'm not the one thing what I want to get out of is like, I know that a lot of times when we have conversation about Asian topics, for some reason, then it becomes we're talking only within our bubble. And that's one thing I'm trying to elevate, is that it's more than just Asians. Like, yeah, I know my core audience may be Asians, but how do we get everyone into this discussion, right? Because one thing I want to avoid with the bubble is like, because then people think like, oh, they don't need to listen to this. It doesn't affect them, right? And the thing that I'm trying to show is like, the common humanity, right? And the common experiences like you were talking about. And I love that you've created this audience with Burrfection and like all the cool things that you do with the knives, that you're out there and talking to people and explaining this and connecting to them in this really authentic way. I think that's really beautiful. So that's me. Like I'm still doing the films, but I think with technology and building the audience, it's like, it's so important to just do something that I can control. And I have like super low expectations for this. I was like, I'm just doing this like more for me than anything. Like I just wanted like for me to be able to sit down, and I thank you for like, taking the time, because I know like you taking an hour and your half like uninterrupted in your day is probably quite difficult. You have to plan that. So, but for me, it's also like a great way for me to get to know people that I'm friends with in a much more intimate way, like a closer way, and then maybe find ways that, we could all work together and support each other.
Yeah. So what's it like working with Alibaba? Are you heading up one of the divisions at Alibaba?
When I was there?
Yeah. So like, because you were at UTA, right? So
yeah, but I was only at UTA for a very little time. I was there for a year, and then I was at Alibaba for 3 years. I was in the LA office here, and it's a very small office. And I wasn't the head of that office, but I was one of the key executives there. And it was a great experience, because I got to do a lot while I was there. So, and I was there for 3 years. But we had the president of the company was actually also based in LA. So she ran the office, and she had a small team under her, and I reported directly to her.
Okay. So you were on the film division for both companies?
Yeah, I mean, it was we did a little bit of it was pretty like a little bit of everything, but it was mostly film. Like we did have conversations for TV, for like digital stuff, but none of that really happened. But we did a lot of stuff, like a lot of cool stuff with film. Yeah.
So what do you see? I guess with entertainment right now, being in entertainment, what's it? Are you happy with seeing like I guess I watch Netflix, right? That's like that's the only. I don't subscribe to many, but I do watch Netflix once in a while with my wife and I. What are in terms of the content that you're seeing? Are you happy? You know, because they do. You are seeing Asian actors, and just you're seeing more diverse actors on Netflix more than any other quote unquote network up there. What are your thoughts on the stuff that they're putting out?
Yeah, I mean, that is a long topic. We could just do we could record another whole show on that.
Yeah. We can come back.
I would say, yeah, I would love to.
We can do a whole series just.
Well, when you kick off your podcast, I'll do something.
Okay.
What I would say there is that I'm happy to see more shows with Asian leads. I think that's the key, Asian leads. I think that we can't get satisfied or happy, I would say, even though I want to be optimistic and I want to be energetic and I want to focus on positivity and all that. The reason why I say that is because when I worked for Jet, one of the things that kind of I think probably, I mean, for sure, affected him, but broke my heart. Amazing person, because in China his stature, and in Asia his stature is just off the charts. He's
an icon. Yeah, he's a legend,
right? Yeah, legend, a living legend. And here, when I go to meetings with him in Hollywood, people want to casual way, so you can't really point to anything. And I always thought that was really sad, because Hollywood could have done so much more and the box office would have been amazing, right? But they didn't, because they didn't know what to do with him. And then last year, because we're all sitting at home, and then Black Lives Matter, I not only read a lot of history about the US and Black history, but I also read a lot about Asian American history and Chinese American Hollywood. And the sad thing is, actually, if you think back, if I go kind of backwards in time, we had a moment before this with Joylet Club. We had a moment with this kind of with Jack Chan, Jet Li, China Fat, Donnie Yen. Then Michelle Yeoh, Zhang Zi, right, Crouching Tiger. We had a moment with this kind of with Bruce Lee, and then we had a moment like this with Nancy Kwan, and there's this whole Flower Drum song, it was in the 50s and 60s. And then going back, we have people like Anime Wong, and then we have people going really far back, like Setsu Hayakawa, who was the first kind of idol of Hollywood. He was this idol that all the women were in love with. But what happened was that over time, all these people are forgotten, totally forgotten. And then we end up with these and we end up the same place where we are. So I guess my thing right now is that we just gotta keep going, and we all gotta find our way to tell our stories. And so, for example, I am a producer, but I'm I have to also do TV. I also have to my entire career I've been how do I link up with Asia and with China specifically? Because, for us being here, whether we want to or not, we are kind of an ambassador in some ways to Asia. So if we do have the means to figure out what that bridge is, and Asia has the audience, because one thing we can't forget is that Asians are 60% of the population worldwide, but mainstream media doesn't cover it like that. You can't feel that if you turn on CNN, or if you watch a Hollywood movie, or if you turn on ABC and watch their primetime network. Even when you turn on Netflix, for as international as Netflix wants to say they are, right? You can't feel that when you turn on Netflix. So I'm glad to see where things are going. It's great. And we all have to do it. So when I can't catch up with how many bling empires there are, or how many crazy rich Asians there are, and like people like what that one movie or that one TV show doesn't have to represent us all. Like we have to keep on going. Like for example, this whole GameStop thing, right? There are like at least 5 or 6 projects in Hollywood right now on the GameStop issue. Like when that can happen to like, you know, some issue or something like within like the Asian or Asian American or, you know, British Asian community, like that's, you know, when I don't even want to say like that's when we've made it, but that's when I think that's the direction that we need to go. And I don't know if there's a destination. It's more the journey. So we just have to like everyone that I talk to, like you that I talk to, think about if there's a version of Burrfection that's not on YouTube. Is there a way that you do a show that's like, you know, one thing that I really loved is I loved Mind of a Chef. Like with the early version when David Chang was doing it on PBS, right? Because that was super authentic and he was so passionate about like an ingredient. So at that time he was passionate about like one ingredient and he would dedicate a whole episode on one ingredient. And then that became like must-see TV, which then propelled him to who he is today. Is there some model? It doesn't have to be that model. But is there some model for you to do that? And that's everyone that I talk to, like actors that I talk to, I'm like, what's your story? Write your story, you know? Like writers that I talk to, I was like, do you want to direct? Like think about directing, right? Because like, that's what it's going to take. Like all of us have to like, just tell our stories and not be afraid to.
I mean, on point with that, it was like, you know, the proportion, like when I was in Hollywood and even now, I think the proportion of actors to producers and writers was like night and day, right? There's like everybody wants to be in front of the camera. Everyone wants to be the superstar. And that's, you know, 20 years later, this is when like Beaver told me this one day. Beaver was like, you know, for those who don't know who Beaver was Jet Li's assistant prior to Jason taking that role.
And now Beaver is an EVP at Gravity Pictures, CMC Pictures. So this big studio in China.
Yeah, he's a big shot now. You know, he's producing, you know, amazing stuff. The Meg, the shark movie.
Yep.
You know, but he said to me one day, and this is something that like I'm only now realizing like the importance of what he said. He just like, we need more producers in Hollywood that are Asian.
Yep.
And at the time, he said, Ryky, why are you acting? Become a producer with me. You know, and at the time, I was like, and I didn't know what I wanted. I wanted to get away from Boston. I just wanted to be, I wanted to be another Jet Li, right? I mean, I wanted to be a star. Like now, I'm only the star because it's my show. I'm a one-man show. There's no other star. But my role in Burrfection is my producer role and what I'm doing in my enterprise, in my YouTube channel is much more important than the face in front of the camera.
Right.
You know, so not only now do I appreciate the role producers play in content management and content creation. You know, so like I guess the scenario, not the scenario, the question. I'm okay on time if you are.
Yeah, I'm cool. Yeah.
But I think for me is like, okay, so we know that we need to have more projects that's not necessarily Asian centric, but just having more Asians involved, right? But then the question is, where's that money come from? If it's the studio heads controlling it, how do you actually get the studio heads to say, all right, I'll take $100 million risk on. Well, now there's no risk if they were to release, you know, Crazy Rich Asian #2. But how do you actually get the studio head to actually say, all right, I'll invest $20 million?
Or they're not Crazy Rich Asians, right? Because not all Asians are crazy and rich.
Yeah. So the question is, how do you get someone to risk that kind of money?
How do you get someone to risk a pursuit of happiness with an Asian lead, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the question.
No, that's a great question. So when I was at Alibaba, that's why when I was at Alibaba, like, you know, I thought that job was so amazing and really a dream job for me, and something that I wanted to do like kind of forever, because I realized that I had an ability there to get things going. Like, you know, the last movie that I was an executive on is called A Dog's Purpose. And in A Dog's Purpose, that movie is a sequel of so the sequel is called A Dog's Journey. That was the last movie that I was an executive on. The first movie is called A Dog's Purpose. The Dog's Purpose, I saw that movie and acquired it for China for Alibaba, and it was a surprise. No one thought it would do anything because it's not a blockbuster. It's not based on any IP. The budget was like a $20 million budget. No actor in there was well known in China, but that movie did $88 million in China, which was like unbelievable. And so when it came time for the sequel is it's the sequel. So the first movie already did well. It's become now a known entity, and it's based on a book. They're all based on books. And in the book, there is a Chinese character and I asked, because the first movie did so well, can we make that Chinese character into a bigger character? Because in the book, it was a very small character. And so because the movie did so well in China, they were like open to that. So the studio, which is Steven Spielberg's company called Amblin, they were open to that. And they actually, together, we made that character into the male lead. He was also the male romantic lead. And he also, to your point earlier, he could just be the boy next door. He had no accent. He literally just played the boy next door. The only sign that you had that he was Chinese was that at first he looked Chinese. He was played by a Chinese actor. And he spoke one line of Chinese dialogue to his parents in the movie. That was it. Otherwise, he spoke English with that, like us. And he played the boy next door. He got the girl, and happily ever after. And so that experience to me is really like the template of like the type of films that I want to do now that just show us kind of in the world. And, you know, that sequel film, it did well in the box office. And also importantly to the studio, Universal, who released it, is that when they did the testing on that film, the character of that Chinese boy, the boy next door, and the actor who played him, he tested the highest right there with Dennis Quaid. And it was surprised the studio because they didn't understand it. And the actor that we cast, I found that actor because no one here knew who he was. He was a K-pop star who happened to be Taiwanese Canadian. And we cast him in that role for his first Western Hollywood role. And why did he test so high? Is because when I looked at the comments, fathers who had daughters stated that they liked that character and would like a character like that to date their daughters. Right? So that's like the power of like how one film can change things. But I know that if I wasn't there at Alibaba, that would not have happened. And so like when you ask about producers, I think it's everything. It's writers who are Asian. It's directors. It's studio execs. You know, one thing when I was doing Alibaba is I made a concerted effort to go around town and find studio executives and, you know, any level of executives at production companies who were Asian. And I try to get to know them and try to build a relationship with them. And, you know, that might sound, I wasn't trying to be like exclusive about it, but I knew that I needed to get to know them because they potentially would be the difference to getting some of these movies made. Because we need, and you know, becoming a executive at any studio and becoming a person to get a job at any production company, it's a grind. Like to have gotten there, first of all, and then to be like Asian. Like, first of all, when you have like so many things like going against, like your family doesn't want you in this business, right? The industry doesn't want you in this business. Like, it's a grind. And so for an Asian executive place at a company that's known in Hollywood, it's like quite a big deal, I would say. You know, so yeah, I think that is very important, a key insight that, you know, that Beaver was talking to you about way back then.
Yeah. I don't want to go into film production, Hollywood. That's just, I think it's.
No, I don't think you have to, but that's what I'm saying. Like whether you figure out what it is.
Yeah.
So what's like the adjacent step for you, right? You don't have, because like I think you have like this beautiful thing kind of going on. So it's not like, ditch that and do Hollywood. No, like, and then nowadays it's like, that's why even from like the beauty of what you do is you have, in a lot of sense, you have a lot of control. Like you maybe not have like all the control, but no one ever does. But you have a lot of control on where you want to take things. And, you know, you have this also a connection to an audience, like a direct connection. That's actually the thing that Hollywood is missing right now, right? Because that's what Netflix has. And that's what every Hollywood studio is now chasing. Like Netflix has this direct subscription kind of relationship. They have all this data, right, to the audience. And no other studio has that, because like movie tickets, when you go buy a movie ticket, they're like, oh, we kind of think it's these people. But the movie tickets is like totally like analog. There's not digital kind of at all. There's not a lot of data behind it. It's a lot of like guessing, like in terms of that. And so Hollywood is like behind because they don't have that direct relationship. And so for you with a direct relationship, and for you with this like core audience, like where can you go that's like adjacent to that? I think it's really interesting to watch. Like I'm excited for you to see where that goes.
Yeah. You know, one thing when I was looking at your questionnaires, the sheet, I'm just thinking, you know, funny little thing that comes up is, you know, it's funny how, and I don't sense this every day because my audience have already trusted me and they kind of love me for who I am. But when I see like a film with an Asian actor, it's like the film has to explain why he's Asian, why that role exists for him.
Yeah.
You know, versus the other way around. It's just like, that character, you know, in Iron Fist, he's white because he's a rich white boy that's looking for searching for his purpose in life, right? It's
man, yeah. I can complain a lot about that.
Yeah. Well,
and that's when you asked me about Netflix, I didn't want to go there, but like they've made these stumbles like that. You're like, and you know, that's why, like, for example, like on A Dog's Journey, I was so proud of that for everyone, not just me. Like the fact that, you know, Steven Spielberg's company Amblin, that they saw it, that the execs there saw it, that the screenwriters were willing to do that the director was willing to do that, like everyone. Because what you talked about right there in that movie for A Dog's Journey, we didn't explain it. He's a boy, and he's there, and he's just a cool, charismatic kid. And there's not a moment, not a second that goes into explaining, you know, why he's Chinese, why he's Asian. Because you don't have to. It's like the world is like, that's like the perverted thing about a lot of this, is that the world is 60% Asian. And somehow like the Western media has made like Asians like this this anomaly, this minority, which like if you think about 60% of the world's population, for sure we're not minorities. But there's a lot of diversity within that Asian population, right? So yeah, like and then like things like Iron Fist, like, you know, on the same token, we can talk about, I mean, this is like getting into like kind of like murky territory.
Yeah.
But like, you know, you could talk about like Mulan, or you could talk about Great Wall. Great Wall is a great example, right? Like, how did those things happen? You know, how did those stories happen like that? I mean, Iron Fist too, for sure. Like, how did a story? I mean, but if we go along the lines, there's like so many movies, right? Like Aloha is a movie. Ghost in the Shell.
Ghost in the Shell, yeah.
It's another movie, right?
Oh, and the list is endless. I mean,
Dragon Ball, like it crushes you when like Dragon Ball is like becomes like that, or that movie like 21 about like the kids that like took down the kind of the casino and stuff like that. I've even heard so there's this Michael Lewis book. Michael Lewis, who wrote like The Big Short and Moneyball, like so his books have been made into great movies, Academy Award-winning movies. So one of his books is called Flash Boys, and Flash Boys is about high-frequency traders who kind of took down the financial system or really disrupted it and created a lot of chaos. And the Flash Boys, they're all Asian, and so someone in Hollywood had optioned that book. And then wanted to, of course, make it not Asian. And so I've heard that one of the reasons why it's still not made to this day, even though the story is so good, is because, no studio or production company feels like they can put together the, all Asian cast to tell that story. Like they don't believe that it's bankable.
I see. Yeah, that is a whole. I mean, we can revisit that conversation.
Well, that's an endless conversation.
It is. It's an ongoing.
That's why I do what I do, and that's why, like for me, I decided to leave Alibaba and start my own company because I was like, this opportunity. Even though we are framing it as these are some problems that we see and some misses, it's also an opportunity. Right? It's like an amazing opportunity because the audience craves this type of movie. Like, look at the box office of Crazy Rich Asians. Look at the critical acclaim of like The Farewell or Minari, right? Look at like the adoration for like Kim's Convenience or like Fresh Off the Boat. Those are just like really the tip of the iceberg.
They're just good shows. I mean, they're just good content. I mean,
but that's really the tip of the iceberg, right? Yeah. And that's really just the start. And audiences are loving it and showing. And To All the Boys That I Love, it's on Netflix, right? And so I think the audience is there and just craving it, and they want to see it. Like even White Tiger, I think is the name of it on Netflix, the Indian movie. And so the audience is just craving it. And then, so if we can tell these stories in the right way, it's going to be there. And so for you, like whatever that thing is with Burrfection, that's why like I mentioned like Chef's Mind of a Chef, because I was like, yeah, you don't have to go into like become like all Hollywood. Like you can figure out what that is. But like, I believe like you have an audience because of a similar thing. Like they want to see you doing what you're doing. Yeah. Well, so I guess one thing kind of to leave us on a note to take us out is like, I'm curious, like, because you've had a lot of challenges. What's something that you do for self-care? And you have like so much going on in your life,
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah. Well,
how do you stay,
Yeah. So at this point, it used to be where like fitness was a requirement in my life, right? But I had to work out to compete, to live. Now, I block out time with 3 kids now and a dog. That dog really complicated everything. Like of all the
things. That's funny. How it's the dog and not the 3 kids.
Yeah, because the dog wakes up at 5 as well, and I can't. Okay. And the dog whimpers at 5 in the morning.
Oh my gosh!
If I don't take her out, so, literally, like normally, before we got the dog in April of last year, 2020.
Okay.
In March or April, somewhere there. But before that, for the last 2 or 3 years, even when I was living in LA, I wake up at 4:30, 5 in the morning, and I go swimming. I go to the pool. And I have an hour and a half of swim time.
Yeah.
And then that was like my workout for the day. And then for the rest of the day, I can chill. I can do whatever, take care of the kids, and just be a family man. Now, like I wake up at 5, I gotta take the dog for an hour walk, And when it's not so cold, we will go for an hour run. But so my routine is off because I like swimming in the mornings. I don't like running in the mornings. I run out of necessity. I really hate running, but I love swimming.
Yeah.
So that's physical. Like, so in terms of my physical health, I'm very active, even though I don't have a lot of time. I force myself to squeeze in 45 minutes to an hour of exercise outside of just walking the dog. So it could be running, it could be skating. I skate a lot these days.
Oh, cool. That's great.
Yeah. So I skate. You know, I got back into inlining, so I converted my speed skates to inlining boots. So that's on the physical side. On the emotional side, I think that's to me is where it's what helps me get the farthest in life. It's like, it's like, do I love what I'm doing? Do I love going to bed with myself every night? Like, can I, you know, it's like, am I fulfilled when I put my head on my pillow? Am I happy with how the day went? Right. And a lot when, you know, so kind of when I wake up in the mornings, the first thing I do is not look at my phone. I actually don't look at my phone for about 3 hours after I wake up. So first thing, an hour with the dog, and then I come home. The kids are just getting up, or they may have been awake for a little while. Then there's an hour and a half with the kids. You know, reading time with them, breakfast with them, putting away the dishes. That's like kind of my thing in the morning. And then, you know, wife will usually wake up around 7:30. You know, a little bit later than that sometimes. But I don't look at. I don't care who wrote me. I don't care how the stock market is doing. I don't look at my phone. And that's, you know, and I've also so that's kind of the emotional, like, prepping my day event. I've also turned off all notifications on my phone.
Yeah.
So if you are a fan and you wrote me, I don't know that you wrote me. Right. I block out schedules, you know, half an hour, 45 minutes a day to look at fan mail or look at fan comments. If I don't get to it, then it's over. That's it. Like, I don't try to, you know, I'm not in bed trying to, who wrote me, you know, see what ratings did I get today? How many views I got? Like, I don't care how many views my videos get. I don't care if I get thumbs up, thumbs downs on my videos anymore. Numbers, you know, numbers don't matter to me at all anymore. And so because now I think I'm in a place where I have, you know, I've proven what I can do. I've proven to myself that I'm successful with what I'm doing. I don't need any more validation. I think, you know, in terms of like real success, until you can convince yourself that you're not working for anybody else, like if you're always trying to prove yourself to somebody else, to your, you know, if your self-worth is based on how many subscribers you have, you're done. Like, you're gonna burn out. You've already been defeated, you know. And so for me, it's like, don't worry about, you know, what the numbers are happening. If you know, in my case, if my kids, they wake up happy with a smile on their face and they tell me they love me every day, like, that's it. You know, I got my wife, my kids. That's the most important thing. And then, then it's my physical health and my mental health when it comes to running my channel. I still operate it very much like a hobby channel. You know, like, I'll go for months and months without posting anything. Not because I'm trying to make people wait on purpose. It's just, sorry guys, I couldn't post this week. Sorry guys, my kids were sick. And I don't even say sorry. I'm just like, hey guys, my kids were sick this week. Won't be posting anything. I'll see you guys next week. You know, so, you know, I think for me is, I'm very comfortable with who I am now. I'm very comfortable, like I'm perfectly happy with who I am, you know, and that has changed my entire perspective on work, on hustling, you know, on everything else. It's like I you know, I still get phone calls from casting directors, you know, for little things here and there. I don't respond to them because I know it's gonna be the same thing. It's gonna be the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, until I get a phone call one day and say, hey Ryky, we want to do a docuseries on you, and like it's going to be your thing. You take the wheel, how you want to handle it. I'm not gonna answer.
Well, no one's going to give you that call, but what I'm saying is you should think about it. You can do it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think
you don't have to wait for that call. Nowadays, you can do that. If that's what
so that's the beauty of like low cost mediums, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like basically no entry mediums of podcasting and YouTubing. And I'm considering it now because I have been, successful with what I have been doing. So so now I'm exploring other mediums, or not necessarily other mediums, but just other avenues. Is for sure. And whether or not they get, whether or not that new, channel gets, millions of subscribers, I think just hearing one story and having, I think the suppression is what is, at least in my case, is like growing up. And I don't know what's like for you, but my family, you don't talk about your feelings. You don't talk about your concerns. You don't talk about what's making you happy. And like, if I can just give a platform for anybody to like discuss and like let those things off their shoulders, like I think just hearing that one story and having that one person, giving that one person an ear, I think that in itself is going to be fulfilling enough, not just for me, but for that person as well.
So 100%. I love that. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, thanks again for taking the time. And we have like so much to talk about because one thing that you mentioned that we didn't even dig to, and I have to go, or else I would ask you, is you mentioned about like the online trolls, and given, what happened these recent months, like we'll have to take that up some other time. Yeah. But I'm sure you have a lot of interesting stories there. But thanks for doing this. And I want to acknowledge you for like all the like cool things that you're doing and continue to do, and just like the balance that you have, and like that realization that you have for yourself, for your family, your audience. I think it's really great. And so I can't wait to connect again. Thanks for doing this.
Jason. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and let me know when you do want to do that podcast. Like, let's do it. If I can help you in whatever way.
Yeah. We'll make it happen.
All right. Cool, man.
Thanks, Jason.
All right.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.